Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, December the 1st, 2020. It is currently 11:09 a.m. Central Time. I'm here at Victory Baptist Church. The last episode, I put it in the I don't want to, but I have to categories, right? That the last episode was a podcast that I didn't want to do, but I felt that I had to do. That felt that it was necessary. I didn't enjoy it, but I had to do it. This one, I'm putting in the category of maybe this is going to work. Maybe this is not. Maybe this is not the right way to try to make my point. Maybe this is not even connected, but I'm going to do it anyway. I mean, I've hit the red go live button, so there's no turning back. I'm going to try to explain what I'm trying to accomplish. This is a situation where I kind of have a thesis in mind, but I don't know if this thesis is really going to play itself. I don't know if we're really going to accomplish what I think we're going to accomplish. And part of the reason is I heard this around 3:30, 3:45 in the morning. I've got an audio clip. I didn't explain that. I'm getting ready to play an audio clip. I'm getting ready to play basically a podcast episode that I heard at around 3:30, 3:45 in the morning. So I have this foggy idea of what they talked about. And in my mind, it connected to the thing I heard prior to. So let me put this all together. And this will all make sense. I know right now you're making absolutely no sense. I know that. That's because I'm such a great communicator that I communicate at such a high level that it goes over your head. And so then I have to stop and then break it down, because you should just be able to understand what I'm trying to say, even though I'm not really saying anything. I'm just using a lot of words. All right, let me try to break this down. Okay, at around 3 a.m., I heard the Discover the Word podcast, where they were talking about culture and how it impacts our ability to interpret the Bible. And remember, we did a whole episode this morning about this, right? How we tend to view Scripture we tend to view the Word through a cultural lens. And in that podcast episode, they talked about Western cultural perspective versus an Eastern cultural perspective, a collectivist perspective versus an individualistic perspective. And I talked a lot about that as Christians, we have to try to ensure that we see what is influencing the way we interpret Scripture, right? Okay, now, there is another concept that I think this podcast is going to get us to, all right? I think so. Maybe it won't, maybe it will. I'm going to go ahead and throw out the idea. Not only do we have this Eastern, Western cultural perspective, not only do we have an individualistic, collectivistic perspective, there is also something that is greatly influential in how you interpret the Bible. And I'm going to call this, and now for those who are not in America, I cannot speak for you, but in America, there is an American Christian culture. Within American Christianity, when we say the American Christian culture, the Christian culture at large, there is a I just called it a culture. There is a cultural perspective that begins to dominate American Christianity at different times. In other words, an idea, a movement, certain interpretations. They're just kind of a part of the Christian culture. In other words, when you become a Christian, like if you became saved at an older age, you'll understand this. You lived in the normal culture, right? And then you became a Christian, and then you immediately get thrown into Christian culture, right? There's a language. You listen to Christian radio, you listen to Christian podcasts, you read Christian books, you talk to other Christians, you hear sermons, you're around people at church, you may do Bible studies, you get thrown into this new cultural paradigm, into this new cultural perspective called American Christianity. And you just start getting told, this is the way you interpret this. This is what Christians believe about this. This is what Christians believe about this. And it almost just becomes the default position. Now, hopefully, as you mature as a Christian, you sometimes call into question, wait a minute, Christian culture seems to say we do this. Why do we do this? And you should challenge it. I have made it my lifelong goal as a Christian to constantly be challenging Christian culture. Because I think a lot of things Christians just say, this is the way you do things. I'm like, why do you have to do that? Now, I've always been that way. That's not a spiritual thing. That's a fleshly thing. It's more of a fleshly thing. I think it's a strength that I have, but it's a weakness as well. Let me explain. When I was in high school, all right, I could even go back I'll go all the way back to kindergarten. When I was playing baseball, little kid. Okay, after a baseball game, you get snacks. This is the way it worked back then. You get snacks. My perspective is, why do we get snacks if we lost? We shouldn't get snacks. That's a reward for losing. Losers don't get rewards. Losers don't get rewards. Losers get absolutely nothing. So I'll give you 2 examples in my life. I called into question that kind of cultural expectation. So I remember we were playing baseball near Abilene High School. I was really little, kindergarten. I mean, I had to be really, really little, kindergarten, first grade, because my mom would tell this story. So I've got a lot of the story from my mom. Now she's been dead a long time, so I can't go back to her and verify. All my parents are dead, so I can't go back and verify this. But this is the story I was told. I have some memory of it, but not a perfect memory. So I'm just trying to make sure I try to be as accurate here as I can. I was playing baseball. Now, my mom said I got really upset at the other kids because I didn't feel like, A, they were putting forth good enough effort, and B, I didn't believe that they were they should deserve to be playing because I didn't think they were very good. So I started doing things like, I'm supposed to be playing in the outfield, but I would run up and almost knock the kid out of the way playing shortstop. In other words, I tried to just basically do everything on the field because I believed the other kids were not very good or not paying any attention, and I was telling them that they basically stunk and they should leave and they should never play baseball again. Well, we lost said game, possibly to me knocking kids out of the way, trying to do their part, okay, trying to play their position, right? So probably part of the problem was probably me, but okay, I didn't perceive it that way then. I perceived that I was the solution and everybody else needed to leave. Well, we lost the game. And then we come off the baseball diamond and they have snacks and I lost it. So I went over and I took the ice chest, dumped it over, started throwing the soda cans everywhere, knocked over they had like a table with snacks. I knocked it over. I'm like, we don't deserve any snacks. And my mom had to pull me aside and I got in all kinds of trouble. And because I said, we don't deserve anything. Then later on, I think it was freshman year of high school. I can't remember. I think it was high school, playing football. And we lost the football game, and I was mad because I don't believe in losing. Losing is for losers. I don't want to be a loser. I hated losing, and it's one of the reasons I had to get out of sports because I was not able to control myself correctly. But we stopped to get pizza, and I'm like, why are we stopping to get pizza? So everyone went in to get pizza. I can't repeat what I told my coach. I'm not going in, and then I took my football helmet and started smashing things in the bus because we don't deserve. So why do we get snacks for losing? I did not go along with the crowd and didn't go along with the cultural norm. And then when I got to high school, I called everything into question. Once I stopped playing sports, why do I have to cheer for our team? Pep rally. Why do I have to go to the pep rally? It's not learning. So I'm not going. I refuse to go. In fact, in many cases, I got in trouble. Why do we have to have a prom? Why? Why do we have to have a graduation? I don't want to go to a graduation. I just want you to give me my diploma. Why do I called into question everything because why do I have to do it just because the culture of high school says this is what you must do? Well, then when I became a Christian, I thought, okay, now I'm countercultural, right? I'm going against the culture. And then the next thing you know, I turned around, boom, I got smacked in the face. Here's the Christian culture. And now here's what you must do this is how church must work, right? Now you're in the youth group, and guess what we do in youth group time? We're going to come to the church and we're going to play capture the flag. I'm like, wait, what? Why am I coming to church to play a game? I want to learn scripture. Why do we do this? Why do we cancel preaching for a fellowship and why? And so I called into question everything Christian did. And I'm always told, no. Like that's the way you have to do things. And so when I became a pastor, I told everyone from day one, well, I'm not going to do church like everyone else because we're going to do church like everyone else. What's the point? Just go join another church. So we don't do things like everyone else, right? We have hour-long sermons, Sunday school, It's an hour of teaching. Sunday, hour of teaching. Sunday night, Wednesday, hour of teaching. I don't plan fellowships and activities. If you want fellowships and activities, the people in the church can plan whatever they want. They can get together Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but it's not the church's job to plan entertainment. It's not the church's job to do those things. So a lot of things that churches do, I threw out. I'm not following the template because that's a part of American Christian culture. I think a lot of what we do is not even in the Bible. It's just like, you have to do these things. And if you don't do it this way, you can't be a church. Well, in some ways, the people who told me I can't do that were right, because I'm the pastor of a very small church, because my ideas would never fly in a big church. But why don't they fly? Because they don't fit in with American Christian culture. So there's practices. I believe there's doctrinal beliefs, and I believe there's biblical interpretation that's more of a reflection of Christian culture than it actually is of Bible reading, studying, and interpretation. Does that? I know that's a long way to get there, but I want you to understand that. Like, someone's got to. I use myself as an example because I go against that culture. Well, I think there's a Christian culture that sometimes we have to go along with. And I think a lot of times what you don't realize, listen to me carefully. Just as Western culture versus Eastern culture, just as individualistic culture versus a collectivist culture, just as that influences how you interpret the Bible, and it may be the most influential thing leading to your interpretation of the Bible, there is an American Christian culture that is also greatly influencing how you interpret the Bible. And different things come flying into the American Christian culture, dominates the way Christians think, and they're just like, that's how we interpret the Bible. That's what the Bible means. And you're like, are we sure? Now, the podcast we're going to listen to, they're going to try to bring two concepts together, right? And I'm doing this with a foggy memory, okay? Because it was close to 4 a.m. and I know I fell asleep around 4 a.m. So I didn't even make it through this. I just know when I woke up like around 7, I was like, oh, that podcast ended. All right, so Discover the Word was the first one. So that already got me thinking. So I was laying there thinking about culture. I know you're like, Wendy, I haven't slept. I don't even know the last time I slept. Okay. So the point is, I was thinking all this culture stuff. And so when I heard this podcast that we're getting ready to listen to, I connected it with the previous one, which may be wrong. I should have listened to this again, but I want to just go ahead and get this recorded because I want to expand on this discussion that we had in our first live broadcast today. So here's the idea. Is it possible that a lot of our thinking in Christianity about, say, something like eschatology, the study of end times, of Bible prophecy, the second coming of Christ, is it possible that some of that is more, we have that thought more because of American Christian culture and not because of clear exegesis and study of the Bible? In other words, what beliefs do you have that are more simply reflective of American Christian culture and less reflective of clear, careful Bible study? And when I say American Christian culture, every church has its own kind of Christian culture. There's just things you're supposed to do, things you're supposed to say. How much of that is we derived it from the Bible, or it became the default position once we were introduced into that culture? Look, kids walk into a high school and they just adopt the culture of the high school. Oh, you're not supposed to do this. You're supposed to wear this. You're not supposed to talk this way. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to cheer for your team. You're supposed to go to the bonfire. And I don't even know what the purpose of all of that is. These are things you're just supposed to do because it's a part of the high school culture. It just becomes the default position. Well, if that's true in high school, you became a Christian, and I'm sorry, whether you liked it or not, boom, you got hit in the head with a new culture. And there was these default expectations. This is what you must do. You must talk this way, walk this way, believe this. Now, some of that we hope comes from Scripture. But I wonder at times when has Christian culture superseded Scripture? Now, that's my premise. So we're going to listen to this. Now, this is a Christian podcast that I discovered on Edify, the Christian podcast app, where there's currently available for you on one single app, the Edify Christian Podcast app, over 2 million Christian podcasts. So at around 2 a.m., I was just going for just searching, just trying to find every Christian podcast I could find on Edify. I mean, I found so many. I'm having problems breathing this morning. I had so many at one point that I was like, I don't even know how many I'm subscribed to right now. Probably like 400. I just was going, subscribe. Oh, what's this? Subscribe. And I stumbled upon this one. And this is just one that I ended up listening to at around getting close to 4 a.m. But as I was listening, I think they use, maybe I was hearing things, but I think that they use some language that you typically wouldn't hear in a Christian podcast. I think they use some explicit language. I don't know where it's going to be, but I'm just going to give the warning. At least my mind remembers that, but who knows? At one point, I was listening to Alex Jones, who yells and screams and says all kinds of stuff. So I don't know if I was merging all of these together. But bottom line is, we're just getting ready to find out together, okay? That's the bottom line. See, I've got this really clear way of thinking that, because I that's really kind of the thing I'm going with this morning, this idea of how culture influences Christianity and our interpretation of the Bible. So we've talked about Western and Eastern, individualistic and collectivist. Now we're going to talk about American Christian culture. Has American Christian culture influenced what you believe in regards to the second coming? Now, I think at one point, I know early this morning, I keep saying, if I say last night, obviously early this morning, 2 or 3 a.m., that's not last night. Earlier this morning, I know at some point I started kind of just talking to myself while I was listening, saying, well, maybe you should go beyond the 19th century and you should go back to church history throughout. Because I'm going to go ahead and just make this argument. I believe that the entire history of the Christian church for 2,000 years has had a belief about Christ returning. I don't believe that's something that was made up in the 19th century by American Christian culture. So we got to make sure we establish that. I think we would argue that the Bible says Christ will return. I got the book of Acts right here. We'll look at Acts chapter 1, where, hey, this same Jesus who just left, he's going to come back in the same way. Okay, well, that tells us something. So I think that I don't know if they're. I think that I felt like that they weren't fair. I think they were trying to put too much of the blame on American Christian culture and not dealing with a broader issue. But we will see. We're just going to let this play out. We're going to see what happens. We'll see how long this goes. I don't know. If you're listening to me live, feel free to throw in your comments at newsif@yahoo.com. Newsif@yahoo.com. I will try to check the email. All right. So I don't know if I should do this, and I don't even know if this is going to work. I don't know if this is. I probably should have just started playing it and then just start talking about it, but I wanted you to understand the thinking here. And this may not work the way I want it to work, and this may all turn out to be a big failure, but hey, that's okay. I've failed before. I'll fail again. So if you're afraid of failure, you'll never try anything. So here we go. But I don't like losing. So see, I say that all spiritual. If you don't like failing, right, then you'll never try anything. I sounds like, such a motivational poster. I really don't believe that, if I'm being honest with you, because I hate failure. And I don't think my hatred for failure keeps me from trying, but I don't take failure in a good way. No, I don't. So, all right, here we go.
You're listening to the Bible for Normal People, the only God-ordained podcast on the internet. I'm Pete Enns.
And I'm Jared Bias. Today we're talking about the end times and American Christian culture. It's a new spin on a classic tale, but we're talking with Dan Koch, host of the You Have Permission podcast and a doctoral student in counseling psychology. And the reason we're talking with Dan is he did some research on this in American Christian culture and thought it would be a good time. It is still 2020 after all, to talk about the end times. So we hope.
Now let's stop right here. Now, he's talking to someone who's really looking more at this from a psychological, sociological, cultural perspective, which is why I think you probably needed someone to also bring in the perspective of the history of eschatology, Christian history. Like, you need someone from a Christian historical perspective going, now, okay, yes, American Christianity has done certain things with end times teaching, but end times teaching way predates the existence of America. I mean, come on. I mean, weren't when we read the letters to the church at Thessalonians, weren't they having some issues about the second coming, right? Right? Weren't they having some issues about when Jesus was going to return, resurrection of the dead? Wasn't that some of the reasons Paul was writing the church at Thessalonica, to try to resolve some of those problems? Isn't the book of Revelation still in the Bible? Hasn't it been in the Bible? So we'll just see. But I like the idea that, hey, let's look at the cultural aspect of this, because I think there is a Christian culture. It exists. You know it. I know it. It gave you certain ways of thinking, and I think sometimes that those ways of thinking have nothing to do with the Bible. Let's see how they draw all of this together, all right? And, of course, I think they were being a little tongue-in-cheek by saying that they're the only God-ordained podcast on the internet. I think that's a little tongue-in-cheek. I'm not a big fan of bringing God into your sarcasm. I'm not a big fan of that. Yeah, but I think you're going to see that these guys definitely don't. I think you're going to see that they don't definitely fall in line with what we would probably consider. I'll let you draw your own conclusion. Yeah, you draw your own conclusion about where you think they fit in the theological framework of Christianity, and just make it very clear. You can stand outside of American Christian culture, condemn American Christian culture, but just realize you have your own theological perspective and things that influence you. Even though you may reject American Christian cultural influence, you have your own baggage and your own influence that you bring into it as well. So nobody is, perspective or no one has a perspective that's not influenced by other outside things, which is what we've kind of talked about today. All right. So let's continue here.
That you enjoyed this episode, but before we jump in, I did want to mention we have something new on our Patreon page, patreon.com/The Bible for Normal People, where after each episode of the podcast with a guest, Pete and I are actually doing an afterword. It's about an 8 to 10 minute commentary on the episode where we dive into some things that we hadn't been able to dive into in the episode. So go ahead and check it out, patreon.com/The Bible for Normal People. Enjoy.
People who believe literally that their neighbors and coworkers will burn in hell do not make life decisions that reflect that belief, except for the handful of people outside the baseball game who, by the way, most of us would assume have a psychiatric condition. Things that we assent to are it's kind of not that big of a part of our lives, and we don't really think about them all that much.
All right, now I may have to stop this a lot because I'm trying to remember some of the ways I was processing this earlier this morning. First, they have a Patreon. Is it Patreon? I think it's called Patreon. Sometimes I ask myself, am I just dumb? Am I just dumb? Because so many Christian podcasts have all kinds of ways of making money, right? Hey, we're going to do a podcast episode, and then we'll do a 30-minute commentary about our podcast episode and put that on Patreon, and you can listen to it if you give us money each month. And then I'll do a podcast, and I'll do some special podcast episodes that are behind a paywall. And then if you want that, you'll get money because you're really supporting us. And if you want this podcast to continue, you'll give us money. I don't understand why podcasters ever, now I'm not saying that that's exactly the way they presented it, but I'm just saying that I'll never understand how Christian podcasters say that if you want this podcast to continue, give us money. I don't understand that. How much does it cost you to produce a podcast? You need a microphone, a laptop, and you talk. Okay? You can use Anchor, which is free. All right, that's a podcasting platform that's free. So that means it doesn't cost you a dime other than your time and your effort. So I don't like that. Hey, you know, support this. And I'm not saying they said it, but I'm just saying Christian podcast in general will say that the reason this podcast exists is because of your financial support. And without it, we will not be here. Why? Just turn on a microphone and talk. Okay, that's all you got to do. It doesn't cost you anything. Like I remember way back when we started placing things on the internet. I mean, a long time ago, and we were on Sermon Audio. And then I think back then, MacArthur was charging, like if you wanted his sermons, I think it was like $2 a download or $1 a download. And I remember getting so angry. So here we are, a little church in the middle of nowhere with no money. We pay money to be on sermon audio, and all of our sermons are free. But hey, John MacArthur, if you want his sermon, it's $2. It's $1 a pop. And I'm like, how can you charge people to hear God's word? And like, it didn't cost you anything to produce. You already preached the sermon. Like, I don't understand. Like, I preach my sermons, and then I do all of this additional content. Should I be place my sermons for free and then all the additional content behind a paywall? I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. Maybe I'm a fool. Maybe if I was better at finding ways to get financial support, we would have a bigger outreach. We could do more things. We could have better equipment. Maybe, but I just Christian podcasts monetized to make money. I don't know. And now the whole Patreon thing, I understand it. And if you don't know how it works, basically here's what you do. You have a podcast, you create content, you give that content away. And then what you say, if you want additional content, right? Or like, let's say you'll do an hour-long podcast, you give 30 minutes of that episode away. But if you want to hear the full podcast episode, then you need to support our Patreon page, and you do that by supporting $5 a month, $10 a month, and then you can do different levels. If you support us $5 a month, you'll get this additional content. If you do $10, you get this additional content, and we'll have a live chat session where you can chat with me. You're going to pay to chat with me, right? Like, what? Hey, if you want to communicate with me, give me $10 a month and you can chat with me. Now, again, people are not doing Christian podcasts. I got a friend who does a YouTube channel, and he has a Patreon page, and his YouTube page is about books. Fine. People want to pay to talk to him. Wonderful. Great. But for a Christian podcast, it just seems contrary. But there's a lot of Christian podcasts who have Patreon pages, and people pay. People pay. I don't get it. I mean, maybe I'm foolish. Maybe we could have far more money, but I noticed that. And then second, they make that little clip there, how that pertains to the broader story or the broader context of this episode, we'll see. But they play that clip, which I think is interesting, that if we truly believe people are dying and going to hell, we say we believe that, but if we truly believe that, what would we be doing? In other words, would we be going to the baseball game? Or would we be standing outside the baseball game trying to warn people that they're going to die and go to hell? So we say we believe in hell, but do we really believe it? I've raised that question so many times, right? Christians say we believe that people are going to die and go to hell. But then we're like, hey, I don't care about a pandemic killing people. Whoa. If those people are dying and going to hell, you would be like, do everything we can. We don't want anyone to die until they hear the gospel and have a chance to repent. We don't want people dying of COVID. We don't want people dying in traffic accidents. We don't want people dying in war because they will go to hell. It's like sometimes when people die, we don't even think about the fact that they may go to hell. So do we really believe hell? Do we really believe in it? And if we do, how should that impact our life? Is hell just a part of American Christian culture and we just accept hell exists, but we don't really believe it? Like, it's just something it's the default position? I don't know. Is that the point they're trying to make? I don't know. You see how my mind was putting a lot of these things together. Let's see what they do with this. All right, here we go. So the second coming, end times, which if you believe in end times, Christ will come and judge the living and the dead. I mean, some are going to heaven, some are going to hell. Do we really believe that? Is that thinking a part of, did we get it from the Bible or American Christian culture, and what has American Christian culture done with it? All right, let's see where they go here.
So, yeah, I mean, just looking at the title, the end times in the Bible and American Christian culture. So you gave a few passages, and it's something that's pretty relevant. So do you want to trace that historically? Is that right? From the hippies, the Jesus movement? Yeah.
Well, so the way that I have framed it is I did a 4-part series on sort of younger people, like roughly my age, and end times and mental health. So anxiety, depression, scrupulosity, stuff like that. And then as I was making that series, I was like, wait a minute, why the hell was this popular to begin with? Like, right. If I kick it back a step, why was Left Behind massively successful, right? And so that led to this 2-part follow-up, which part 1 aired on Monday. The next part 2 airs on this coming Monday, which is my answer to that question, which is basically, it's tracing it to the Jesus movement and a little bit before that, John Darby and the Scofield Reference Bible. So looking at the 70s and why it was so plausible to baby boomers, basically. And then if we get to the 90s and it's left behind, the people who basically came to Christ or whose faith was reinvigorated around the Jesus movement are the people who hold all the cultural power in evangelicalism in the 90s. So when Left Behind comes out and it's starting to sell pretty well, it's like everybody and their mother gets on board because this is how they fell in love with Jesus, was through around stuff like this. Never mind that, of course, Hal Lindsey was wrong about everything he predicted and all, but it was like nostalgic and it was like their, I don't know, it was their forte.
It seemed like it was their cultural milieu in which they came to faith in Christ. And then now this is popular again. It reminds me when you say that of me with my kids when a Nirvana song comes on. I'm like, I want you to experience this in the same way that I experienced it in the 90s. Like, this is kind of, this is real life. This is real living. This is how I kind of grew up.
Okay, now, this fascinates me because this is really addressing the question, why did the Left Behind series become so popular? And they're saying there was a cultural aspect. That many of the people at that time, right, who kind of held some of the cultural power were people who came out of the Jesus movement in the 70s, where a lot of this end time stuff was so popular, then maybe you could say it kind of lost some of its power. And then in the 90s, when Left Behind came back, there was a nostalgic, this reminds me of the 70s. And was it Thief in the Night? I can't remember some of those movies. And I think, was it Thief in the Night? There was like a trilogy of films. They showed them in the church and, people being led up to a guillotine, their head chopped off and all of this stuff. They were kind of not really well done movies. And I think one of them was filmed in Omaha, Nebraska, if I remember correctly, or at least there was a part of it filmed in Omaha, Nebraska. Because when I if you go back and look at it, the only reason I mentioned Omaha is because I lived in Omaha for 10 years, or Bellevue, Nebraska, which is next to Omaha, for 10 years. When I see that, I'm like, I wonder what part of Omaha was that. So, but those movies were very popular. So, and I know I'm taking a little detour there, but the point is. In other words, did this become popular in Christianity not because of Bible, not because of theology, not because of exegesis, but because it had a connection to culture, American Christian culture of the 70s. Those people are now, they were young, now they're older, and so now there's a nostalgic, I think that's an interesting discussion showing that maybe sometimes what really makes a certain theological thinking popular has very little to do with Bible and has to do with other cultural factors like nostalgia. I hate nostalgia. I hate nostalgia. I cannot stand when older people say, the music today is no good. I only liked the music when I was, and basically they only liked the music when they were from high school because they hear it and there's a nostalgic factor. And when they hear new music, that nostalgia is not there. So then they reject the music now because it doesn't have that same nostalgia. So do we do theology based off of nostalgia? Like when I became a Christian at this age, this was kind of the Christian cultural language. It was the Christian cultural atmosphere. Now, if I hear and see that again, I'm drawn back to it. That's a fascinating thought. So there's a lot of things interesting there. But what bothers me is, wait a minute. Let's just be fair here. Let me make this very clear. The idea of the second coming and end times did not start with the Jesus movement, did not start in the 70s. Jesus movement, I put that more in the 60s, kind of coming out of the hippie movement of the 60s. But okay, the late 60s, the Jesus movement, going into the 70s, the birth of the contemporary Christian music world. Okay, all right. The idea that they became a cultural force, no question. But this idea predates that by a long time. I'm just going to go ahead and lay this foundation down. All right, right here next to me, I have the apostle, I held it up like hey, look, everyone. Like I held it up like you could say, I don't know what I was doing. Hey, look. Yeah, there's no one in this building. I'm in this building alone again. Okay. The Apostles' Creed. I've got the Apostles' Creed in my hand. And you know the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. Now here we go. He ascended into heaven, seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From there, he will come to judge the living and the dead. The creed, this is one of the earliest creeds in Christendom, puts forth a belief that Christ will come again to judge the living and the dead. There will be we will call it a second advent, since it's Advent season. During the Advent season, we think about the first coming of Christ while looking to the second coming. In fact, many times the scripture, the typical lectionary readings for the first Sunday of Advent, a lot of times reflect on actually the second coming first. That's the first thought, is about the second coming before we even get to the first coming. Christ will come to judge the living and the dead. Let's go from the Apostles' Creed, jump over to the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed, we read this in the Nicene Creed. Speaking of Christ, he was incarnate by the Holy Spirit of the Virgin Mary. He was made a man. He was crucified for us under Pontius Pilate. He suffered and was buried. And the third day he rose again according to the scriptures. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. And he shall come again with glory to judge both the living and the dead, whose kingdom shall have no end. There's the Nicene Creed. So two of the most important creeds in church history have a belief in the second coming. The Nicene Creed goes down further and says this: we look for the resurrection of the dead and life of the world to come. That believes in a resurrection of the dead, second coming, and that there's going to be some resurrection of those who have died, a bodily resurrection and a bodily return of Christ. Those are the other creeds. I can go to Confessions of Faith that gives the same concepts, whether it's Westminster, London Baptist, that believes in some final judgment. God is going to come and judge the living and the dead. And let me go just open up the Bible really quick. If we go to the book of Acts, we read this, all right? We'll go to Acts chapter 1, verse 6. I'll just put this in its fuller textual context. Acts chapter 1, verse 6. And when they therefore were come together, they asked him. So here's the disciples, followers of Christ. They come to Jesus. He's already been dead. He's been buried. He's been resurrected. And so they come to him and they ask him, saying, Lord, will thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Israel? So they're looking for something future, some kingdom and Israel. Right? Now the Bible talks about this. There's promises in the Bible that seem to have never been fulfilled. Are those promises for the church, or are they promise for Israel? If they are, you're looking, if they're for Israel, it hasn't happened yet, so you're looking for something future. Clearly, they were looking for something. Jesus says, it is not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father hath put in his own power. Hey, he doesn't deny that there's some kingdom for Israel. He doesn't deny it. He just says it's not for you to know. He tells them you're going to receive power. After that, the Holy Ghost is going to come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses unto Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the othermost parts of the earth. Hey, I'm not going to tell you about the times and the seasons of when that's going to happen. You've got a job to do right now. Look at what happens in verse 9, Acts 1:9. When he had spoken these things, while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly towards heaven, as he went up. So here's Christ bodily ascending into heaven. They're standing there looking up going, what just happened? What is going on? They're probably trying to process. They're trying to process a lot at this time. He's been dead. He's been buried. He's been resurrected. They've seen him. All right, there's a lot of things they're trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out, now are you going to fulfill all of those promises from the Old Testament? Now are you? No, I'm not going to tell you that. You've got something else to do right now. He ascends into heaven. While they're looking steadfastly towards heaven, two men stood by them in white apparel. We believe these to be angelic beings. They show up, and look what they say in verse 11, Acts 1:11. which also said, ye men of Galilee, why stand you gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as you have seen him go into heaven. That has nothing to do with American Christian culture. It's right there. Jesus, who ascended bodily, is going to return bodily in the same manner. All right, so that means Christians have struggled with this. Now, is there a certain interpretation of second coming things that may be in line with American Christian culture? We could argue that, or it reflects something to do with American Christian culture, possibly. So I just think that they're not being. They want to just go back to the Jesus movement and the hippies. I just don't think that's fair. They want to go to Schofield. They want to go to Darby. But wait a minute, is that American Christian culture, or are these individuals just trying to figure out what the Bible teaches in regards to this? I think there's another historical explanation. Of why in the 70s, listen to me, why a lot of explosion happened about what does the Bible teach. In the 19th century, a lot of things about what the Bible teaches in regards to eschatology. I think there's some reasons why this occurred, and why it took maybe a different. I'll state this. I think there's a historical explanation to why American Christian culture started having a certain kind of teaching about the end times that may appear and look very different than maybe how the early church for a very long time perceived things. And I think what leads to the difference is when a German Catholic monk walked up and nailed 95 Theses to a door to spark the Protestant Reformation. I think the Protestant Reformation is what happened, and I will explain that in a minute. But I just want to make sure this second coming thing is not an American thing. It's a part of the Bible. It's a part of Christian history. All right. Now, how does American Christian culture influence it? We'll see. All right, here we go.
Up, and it sounds like that was a similar experience, you're saying, with these people who came to faith in the 70s, then this left behind, end of the world, rapture filled way of looking at faith. It felt like home, and they wanted to introduce their family to it. Is that a good way of saying that?
I think that's a good way of saying it. Yep.
I had that. I mean, I remember having a conversion experience in high school, and it was that. And I remember like sitting around expecting the rapture to happen in May of that year. You know, that was just
the urgency of that.
Yeah, that was just the moment, and that's just equated with Christian faith in a lot of circles. So, but it's a fascinating question, because I mean, I have to be honest with you, Dan. I don't think I ever thought about why it started. You know, that's a really, really good question to ask, because I think having a why, an understanding of the why, can help clarify a lot of things and maybe give us knowledge to maybe think differently about some of this.
So let's go back here and rewind to, you mentioned Darby, Schofield Reference Bible, some of that, which was sort of the beginnings of this. I mean, what are we talking about?
All right, I got to jump in here really quick before they go on, because they mention, I believe they're mentioning John Nelson Darby. I just want to make sure everyone understands this. He was born November the 18th, 1800, in the city of Westminster, London, United Kingdom, and he died in the United Kingdom. So how does that deal with American Christian culture? He wasn't an American. Right now, does his teaching influence America and become a part of American Christian culture? Okay, it wasn't produced. It wasn't. He died in 1882, way before the Jesus movement, way before the hippies, way before 1960. So that's in the 1800s. He dies, way before. And if you draw his teachings about the second coming to him, then that way predates Jesus movement. And so you can't historically say that's where we start. No, you start with Darby. That's the 1800s, born in 1800, died in 1882. Right. And you got to go through all the other steps. So I'm just trying to offer a broader historical situation. I think there's a historical explanation here, but I do like the fact that they're saying, hey, maybe the popularity of this had a lot to do with American Christian culture. You experience and then nostalgia. And this just challenges us to ask why we believe certain things and why certain things influence the way we think. I do believe that there is an aspect of that that's there. I'm just trying to be balanced here. All right, here we go.
But how would you articulate, I keep wanting to say left behind theology, but how would you articulate it? And can you give us a little more background on the roots that you found for this kind of thinking?
Yeah, so the technical term for it is premillennial dispensationalism. So dispensational, yeah, right. Dispensationalism is the idea that basically the history of mankind on the earth is split into usually 7 periods, dispensations. And I'm not an expert on this, but it's like, creation, perfection, then there's the fall, and then towards the end, you've got the church age, which is like when Christianity is doing its thing, and then you've kind of got the millennium. And there's a few other ones in the middle, different covenants and stuff like that. Premillennial dispensationalism is the idea that the rapture and the tribulation and all this, like the tribulation that's in basically the book of Daniel, this is how people read it anyway, happens before the millennium. Premillennial dispensationalism. And this belief, this way of reading the Bible, specifically this way of reading Daniel and Revelation and some bits of Ezekiel and whatnot, comes through John Nelson Darby. He's a British theologian in the 19th century, and he started it. He was quite influential, and his work ends up being basically the liner notes of the Scofield Reference Bible, which some people will have heard of, which became massively popular after it was published in 1909. It was like huge in the United States. I interviewed in some of these baby boomer interviews I did for these recent episodes. One of the guys, Danny, said the first book I ever bought at a Christian bookstore was a Scofield Reference Bible.
I still had one. It was required reading at Liberty when I was there. So that was the Bible we had to use.
That's insane, but I believe it. Yeah, exactly.
So by the way, I went to college in 1912. I just want to make that clear.
You are older than you sound. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, it's this one.
Okay, so they're doing a good job here getting it threw me off when they kind of went back to like the Jesus movement, and I didn't get where they were going. So I'm glad they've clarified and they've offered the historical context. And at the same time, I don't like, Liberty, they made you use the Scofield Bible. Oh, that's insane. Okay, well, you do realize even if they didn't make him use the Scofield Reference Bible, no matter what school you go to, you can go to a school saying you can use any Bible you want. Guess what? That school still has a theological perspective, and they're going to teach it. Now, having all the students use a Scofield Reference Bible may have been, and I don't know why, but there's probably a good chance that everyone in class has that Bible. Then the teacher making reference to say, hey, look at your Scofield Reference Bible, see that note there, and then they have the information right in front of them without requiring the additional need of a textbook. It could be a positive, a good thing that way. But whether they use the Scofield Bible or not, that system of theology is going to be taught, and every school has a system of theology. Every school has an academic philosophy. Every school has a perspective that they're going to try to get across. So if you're going to condemn one, then you got to condemn all schools, or no, you have a perspective. What was the perspective accurate or not? Okay, just trying to be fair here. All right, so they're doing a good job offering a historical perspective. I just don't know clearly, all of this predates American cultural Christianity. American cultural Christianity takes this and it brings it in. So, okay, I'm just still trying to see where the American culture is going to come into play here, but we'll see.
Guy, I mean, really, he kind of invents it and then it becomes very popular. Now, the reason he is popular is because he makes one really big prediction that comes true. In 1829, he predicted that Israel would reform as a nation. Now, I guess that technically the Scofield Bible became popular before that ever happened, but the reason that it ends up popular like in the 60s, 70s, and onward is that Israel becomes a nation. So he got that one right. And if you're in this world, that's the thing you point to, and you go, oh, so this is a correct way of viewing the world through this prophecy lens.
And isn't
Now, we got to stop here. Did he make the prediction like, hey, I predicted, or does he say, based off the teaching of Scripture, Israel will have to reform as a nation. Is it so much a prediction or is it so much an interpretation? Hey, based off Scripture, God's not done with Israel. He made promises that he hasn't fulfilled. They're going to have to become a nation again. Now, that's far different than just saying he made a prediction. He got one right. Okay, was it a prediction or was it a conclusion drawn from biblical study? Because we want to present it in a fair light, all right? So that's something that we have to consider. Did he just make a wild prediction or, hey, I've been studying the Bible and I don't think God is done with Israel. They're going to have to be formed as a nation because God's got promises he's got to give them that he hasn't fulfilled. And the reason the other people didn't make that prediction is because their theology said God is done with Israel and replaced Israel with the church. So all the promises that God was going to give to Israel, he now gives to the church, maybe not in a literal way, but in a spiritual way. He promised them land. He's not going to give us land, but he's going to give us influence, power, whatever the case may be. Is it a prediction or just the outflow of Bible study, right? Now keep that in mind, because I think that's the explanation of what happened. I think that's how we get here. Okay, but all right. So they're kind of playing down. I don't really like the way they're playing it down. Like if Darby studied the Bible and figured that out, you got to admit that's pretty important because nobody else saw that. Everybody else was reading. Look, get a Matthew Henry commentary and read everything he says when you're reading. Just read Matthew Henry's commentary on Isaiah. Like, he'll say, that's the church. He finds the church in everything. Hey, that's the church. That's a promise for the church. That's a promise for the church. That's a promise for the church. That's a promise. And it's like, so every promise for Israel, it's actually a promise for the church, and all the curses and judgment that goes to Israel. I mean, you read it for yourself. So if if Darby was able to look past all of what was kind of dominating Christian thought at that time and going, the scriptures here seem to be leading me to a different conclusion about Israel, then that's just not some wild prediction. That's something to take note of. And I'm stressing this because I'm gonna provide a historical explanation that I don't know if they get to. They're doing a good job offering some explanation. I just think that's a little dismissive of what Darby did. I think that's a little unfair. He got one prediction right. He got one right. And so everybody's like, hey, that's the right way to view the Bible. How did he get it right? How? Was it because he decided to go against the quote-unquote, look, if you're going to talk about American Christian culture, there was a Christian culture at that time that you read the Old Testament and when you talked about Israel and that Israel had been replaced by the church. That was a dominant thought. All right, here we go.
Like 40 years after Israel becomes a nation, Jesus comes back or something like that. I vaguely remember that.
Yes. So this is in The Late Great Planet Earth, Hal Lindsey's 1971 book, which was among the top 10. Yeah. Among the top 10 selling books, nonfiction books of the 1970s. So it was massively, in the States, massively popular book.
You know, I try so hard to write good books. And
I know.
I should write a crap book.
Actually,
a lot of people think that my books are crap anyway. So, okay. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah, every time I hear Hal Lindsey, I just sort of, my skin crawls. Like, how could you? Anyway, go ahead.
Don't you? Okay, but Pete, a little bit of a sidebar. I mean, I'm increasingly thinking, not that this should be an excuse for bad writing or anything, but anything that becomes a certain amount of popular, like past a certain threshold, that makes me think it's more likely to be wrong than right.
Like the Bible.
I think you guys, what I hear is you guys are just, I hear some jealousy going on here. That's what I hear.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. All I can do is make a few podcast episodes slamming these, left
exactly.
behind.
Right. And we're better than them.
Yeah. Aesop has a fable about some sour grapes and a fox. I think you guys should read it.
So this is like a therapy session now, isn't it?
Yeah,
all right, let's get back. Get back to something.
Where were we? Hal Lindsey, yes, early 70s, Lake Great, and the 40 years.
That's fascinating, though, that what I'm hearing you say.
Well, he was talking about the 40 years. I want to hear that.
No, he was pandering to you because you brought it up.
No, I want to know why 40 years.
It is important. So it is important to understanding this. So there's a certain passage where, Jesus says, there are some of you standing here today who will not taste death before you see the kingdom. Now, there are various ways of interpreting that. Pete, you probably know this better than the rest of us. Some of them are Jesus of Nazareth held a false belief about this, which is maybe fine with still being divine. Other views are like he's talking allegorically. It's like mankind, or whatever. Another view is that it's that the final generation. So that verse on this way of thinking is not spoken to the disciples, to the literal people standing in front of Jesus. It is spoken to the final generation. I don't know how they get that, but that's what they get. And so that then leads to people saying like, okay, it has to happen by 1988, which is why you had that very popular pamphlet that sold some millions of copies, 88 Reasons Why Christ Will Return in 1988 or whatever it was called. So that is the reasoning behind that particular view. And then, of course, now that hasn't happened, there are people who will say, well, maybe a generation is 80 years or 100 years. There's ways to wiggle out of it, of course, because enough of it is, flexible enough.
Yeah.
But what I
Stop right here. Now, again, these things entered into American Christian culture. I was a young Christian in 1980. I think my conversion happened. Yeah, my conversion happened before 88. So I was still a very, 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 very young Christian in 1988. And I remember reading that pamphlet of 88 Reasons Why Christ Would Return in 1988. He obviously didn't. Now, that became a part of American Christian culture. And so at that time, you were thinking Christ is going to return. But let me make sure it's very clear. The reason that entered into American Christian culture is because people were trying to figure out a text of Scripture. This text of Scripture he's referencing is Matthew 16:28, where Jesus says, verse 27, Matthew 16:27, "For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works." Verse 28, "Verily I say unto you, there will be some standing here which shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Now, it raises lots of questions. It does. But we have to remember the context. They don't bring it up. Chapter 17, that's verse 28. That's the last verse of Matthew 16. Matthew chapter 17 starts with the transfiguration of Jesus. So do they get, in a sense, there's those standing here who get to see a preview of Jesus coming in his kingdom in chapter 17. Look at what happens. Matthew chapter 17, verse 1, "And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart." Were those a part of the people standing there? He now takes some of them standing there. 6 days later, he takes them, right? And then what happens? He was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as sun, and his raiment was white as the light. A transfiguration. Jesus now in this kind of glorified state, which is what we could kind of understand, his deity is being seen, his glory. It's like he's coming in his kingdom preview. And look what happens. "And behold, he was there, and behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias, talking with them. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias. And while he yet spoke, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. Now, is that what Jesus was talking about? There's some standing here, and they get to see, in a sense, a preview of the kingdom of God. They get to see kind of what it's going to look like before they die. Is that a possible? Now, if that's so, that has nothing to do with American Christian culture. Now, here's the question. American Christian culture takes this, a certain belief then arises from within American Christianity, a dominant position, a dominant eschatology. And then you become a Christian, and does that just become your default position because of the culture or because of your study of the Bible? All right? These things become like they're making fun and mocking Hal Lindsey. Hal Lindsey became a cultural phenomenon within American Christianity. I think there's a picture in a yearbook of my brother sitting in it's like the bleachers in the gymnasium. He's in the bleachers and he's reading a book by Hal Lindsey. He was in high school and I don't think he professed to be a Christian, but he was reading a book by Hal Lindsey. It's in the yearbook photo, right? That's how much it infiltrated culture. So we want to take the cultural aspect of it, yes, but we don't want to just reject it because a belief may be prevalent within culture. It doesn't mean that belief is wrong. It just means you don't accept said belief as the default cultural position. You have to figure out, what does the Bible say? Because Darby, I want to make it very clear, Darby would have went against his cultural influences when he decided to say, no, God is not done with Israel, and Israel doesn't, and the church doesn't replace Israel. He would have been going against it. So we don't reject, listen, you don't just accept something that becomes a part of the dominant Christian culture, but at the same time, you don't simply reject it because it becomes a part of the dominant American Christian culture. You accept and believe something based off if it's in Scripture. That is what you need to do. All right, let's try to listen to more of this. We're already at an hour, so let's see. We're probably going to have to save this for another time and finish this up. But let's see if we can get a few more minutes in.
I was getting to, before Pete rudely interrupted me, was...
Yes, Jared, what do you want to talk about?
The focal point is this 1948 date because he got that one right. And so that becomes kind of the epicenter. Now we can go forward and say, okay, the first one was, let's interpret this verse to say 40 years. So that would put us at 88. But then if that's wrong, that's okay because we can go back to 48 and we can project another thing. And we can kind of keep, it seems like it's sort of circling around Israel becoming a state and how that was a true prediction based on these certain interpretations.
Yeah. Now, one thing that's interesting to consider, and a lot of historians have done good work around this, is Israel becoming a nation state a prophecy fulfilled by God that Darby foresaw in the text, or is it a self-fulfilled prophecy? Right? There's evidence that British Zionists like Darby sort of gave some of the ideas to the larger Zionist movement. And if you think about how big the Scofield Bible is in the early 20th century, that's when you start to have these American groups really pushing for this kind of a thing. So it has some causal effect on the formation of the nation of Israel in 48.
So you mean basically they could have been picking up on all of these people saying this is a prophecy, and they say, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe we should gather ourselves together and head back to Israel.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a slightly more cynical take, which would be something like the way that some Jewish groups today view Zionist, Christian Zionist, is like, these guys are crazy, but we'll take their money and political power for the things that we happen to agree on. So they don't. They're not so concerned with the mosque on the Temple Mount or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to speak for Zionist Jewish organizations, but they certainly don't agree on everything. They don't believe there's going to be, they don't buy into the whole Antichrist tribulation stuff, right? But they'll take the money and they'll take the lobbying that these groups do toward, American elected officials.
So, okay, so let's fast forward then. That gets us to that 88, that fails, but then there's this renewed interest in the 90s through these Left Behind books. Is there a through line there of they're just picking that up and it's this nostalgia, or is there more to it? Are there other facets that you kind of learned in these interviews?
Yeah, so I was mostly focusing on sort of the 70s themselves, right? I wanted to understand why this was so plausible to them at the time, right? And we can come back to that if you want. But it remains plausible, right? This generation, for whatever reason, in a large chunk anyway of them, they don't ever really abandon this belief. There are ways of sort of massaging it. Oh, so maybe a generation is not 40 years, or maybe that's metaphorical or whatever. But they just sort of keep this basic attitude of Christ is coming soon. And by the time the Left Behind books come out, well, now you've got a purported prophecy expert in Tim LaHaye, who is, I believe, quite established at this point. My research on the Left Behind stuff is less than on Late Great Planet Earth and Darby. But now you've got this popular culture item that's blowing up, and it is nostalgic, but it also hasn't really left. And the other key bit here is who is holding sort of the cultural power in the mid-90s. It's the boomers, right? This is the time when some of the people who were 25 when they became a Christian in the Jesus movement, well, now they're 50, right? And so they're seminary professors. They're on the board of seminaries. They're on the board of denominations of the Southern Baptist Convention. You know, they're running their own Calvary Chapel. They're the head pastor now. They are now a manager at a Christian publishing company, as opposed to they just got their first job at the Christian publishing company, right? You see what I'm saying? So they're just the right age for this kind of more robust career space. And further, baby boomers were really good all along at using media. And so they are not only the people who have the power in the, you know, evangelical subculture come 90s, they've also been training themselves to use mass media for 25 years. And this started even with Hal Lindsey and some of those early folks. And so basically, it's just kind of a perfect storm. This thing that comes through that was a part of the very reason they got saved. You know, Pete, I've been talking a lot, but let me make this one last connection. Pete said that his conversion in high school included just, of course, the rapture's coming soon. And all four of the people I interviewed, all four boomers, said everybody just agreed. It just was like, it was just taken for granted that Christ was coming back soon. It was just so in the water of that subculture. Then now in the 90s, Left Behind comes out. This is like the bride of our youth, to misquote scripture, right? It just felt like it's that good old time religion. This is the good stuff. Jared, your Nirvana thing is perfect. Like, you know, or it's like the Beastie Boys documentary comes out on Netflix. Mm-hmm. And if you have a 13-year-old kid, you're like, let's watch the Beastie Boys documentary together, because that is the real stuff, right? It's just, you know, it's forgivable in that sense. It's normal and human.
I guess the question that I'm still coming back to is, I mean, you said it was just in the water, you know, to think that way. And I'm wondering, like, why is that in the water to begin with? And I know we went back to the 19th century to Darby, but to me that still begs the question of what would make, in technical terms, what would make such an apocalyptic interpretation of the Christian faith so attractive and have such staying power? And, you know, just, you know, even when it's clearly not true, you know, I mean, it's just like the 40s
yes.
came away. So why?
Thank you for saying it that way.
Well, you know, I don't mind saying that.
I know.
Because,
I know. Yeah.
You know, but this is, you know, an apocalypticism, and I guess there are all sorts of reasons why that would be attractive to people. But have you found anything out on that, or given any thought to like why this would even be popular to begin? Like, why did Darby do what he did? You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I don't know about Darby. I mean, I think that Darby.
Yeah, forget him. Let's go closer in time. Let's talk
about the 70s.
Yeah.
Because technically Darby could have been, you know, 100 people like Darby. One of them gets it right with Israel. You know, whatever. Like, somebody gets it right. But in the 70s, so when your generation, my parents' generation, really latched onto this stuff, I'll give two reasons. One is that it seemed plausible in the 1970s that things were pretty much coming to an end. You've got the Cold War, you've got the space race, you've got Vietnam War is still going on and no end in sight.
Terrorism,
yes. Right? The 70s ends with the Iran-Contra affair. You've got, you know, nuclear arsenals are built up between, you know, basically warring superpowers. There's just a lot of stuff going on. You have a big recession in the States in the mid-70s, civil unrest, right? So it's just it's a rough time, sociopolitically, culturally, etc. And then the other bit that I was very surprised and interested to find is that two things are very tied together. Reading these prophecies the way that these people are reading them, and reading the text overall a certain way. And here's the best way to say it. If you're doing a prophecy map, which is what a lot of these things were called, you're doing math, right? You're saying it's this many days, it's this many years. Once this thing happened, it kicks in this timeline, and this clock starts going. Now, could you, here's a hypothetical question for my Bible scholars here. Could you have the type of math that is sufficiently accurate to make a prophecy map and have some loosey-goosey inspiration model like Pete has about the Bible? Would that work?
No.
It would not work. You need something closer to dictation, right? So you basically need something like the Quran or the Book of Mormon, where it is like exact words that God gives to people. Otherwise, the math, you know, the quadratic formula doesn't work if it's like X squared-ish, right? It's got to be exact. So basically, my thesis is that people really like reading the text that way. And that way of reading the text is immediately applicable. It eschews scholarly work and the need to get a big degree, which makes it very popular in low church settings, which a lot of these, the more prophecy heavy groups are mostly low church. They're Baptist, they're independent Baptist, they're not Methodist and Episcopal.
Yeah,
right?
not a lot of Episcopalians running around talking about the end times.
Exactly.
So,
so it just kind of fits in with that way of reading the Bible. And I think this is maybe a little harder argument to make because I don't know as much of the research. But my take from just these 4 interviews with these boomers is there was a real fervor. It was a moment kind of like our own in the sense of there was a kind of cultural Christianity that a young generation saw and thought, this is kind of silly and bankrupt and a lot of arbitrary rules here about dancing and playing cards and wearing a suit. What is all this? Mm-hmm. And then the hippie Jesus comes along and it's like, oh, this is so much more real. And in fact, they were right about that. I mean, that's true. That is more real.
Yeah, it is apocalyptic in that sense that, in the 60s, they're looking to dismantle this age and create a new one.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean, that's one way of interpreting it. So maybe an apocalyptic notion. And again, for our listeners, we've had some discussions about this, right, Jared, in recent months. Mm-hmm. But
all right, we're going to stop listening to them there. We'll have to do a second part here, but I'm going to come in now and offer my perspective here because I think there's some things they're missing. All right, they gave a hint there. All right. Yes, these things, I want to make it very clear, these things do become absolutely a part of American Christian culture and dominates the way a lot of people think, and they just accept it by default, right? I become a Christian. Oh, this is what I'm supposed to believe about the end times because this is what Christian culture tells me. That's never a good thing, but let's make it very clear. There's always been a dominant Christian culture wherever you live about certain beliefs, and you should never just accept them by default. You go to the scriptures to figure out what the scripture should say, and then you interpret Christian culture in light of the scriptures. You don't interpret the scriptures in light of Christian culture. But there are 2 very key elements here that are missing from their conversation. They hint at one. The first one they hinted at was the doctrine of inspiration. If you believe in verbal, that means the words are inspired by God. Plenary, all parts of the Bible are the inspired word of God, right? The historical section, the poetical section, the apocalyptic section, the prophetic section, they're all the inspired words of God. All parts, all words are inspired by God, and they are profitable for doctrine, for teaching, for rebuke, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be thoroughly furnished unto all good works, right? And I don't think I've completely quoted that perfectly, but you get the idea. I'm referring to 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses, well, you go back to like 14, but 16 and 17 right there. You can look at it for yourself. The doctrine of inspiration, this is very important. If you go back to the 19th century, you had a lot of German higher criticism coming in with these different kind of views of inspiration, getting away from a verbal plenary inspiration. If you go back to the Niagara Creed, which we have been studying, if you go back to the Niagara Creed, which is kind of the origins of fundamentalism here in the United States of America, one of the things, in fact, the Niagara Creed, the first point of the creed, deals with the doctrine of inspiration. If you believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God and the words are inspired, when it says Jesus is going to return, you believe that. When you're looking at the book of Revelation, you're trying to figure out what is this talking about? What is going on? If you have some looser version of inspiration, you may not even worry about it, because you don't care about the particulars. You just care about the overall theme. There's a God. He's holy. He loves us. Maybe you even throw out the idea of hell. Maybe you throw out the idea of final judgment. Okay, well, at that point, I don't even know why you're still a Christian. Because if the Bible is not the inspired word of God, and it's just kind of a religious text that gives us some pleasant ideas, and we can just throw out any unpleasant ideas we don't like, what's even the point? You're basically you're creating a religion of yourself, and just go worship yourself. But if you're going to be a Christian and you believe the Bible's the Word of God, then yes, you're going to be trying to figure out these things about the end times. It doesn't mean that they're a product of American Christian culture. It means that American Christian culture held a certain view of inspiration that influenced that culture, and then they started trying to figure out what to believe about the end times, and that began to sweep through American Christian culture, and for many became the default position, which that is bad. Even if your default position is true, it's still bad, because you should derive that position not out of default, but because of your study of the scriptures. All right. So I will say Darby, and like he kept saying, why did people believe this? Well, they believed it because they believed the Bible to be the inspired word of God, and it says Jesus is coming back, and there's going to be judgment. And there seems to be some very apocalyptic things that are happening. Just like when you read in Isaiah about when Babylon's coming and there's going to be all this death and destruction. That was apocalyptic. That was negative. Why would you believe something so negative? Because God says negative things are coming, okay? And so therefore I have to believe it. All right, so there's that. Now, there's another very important thing. He talked about the difference between high church and low church, and that a lot of this stuff shows up in low church and not high church. Well, let me make sure we really get into something very important here. So number one, the belief in inspiration. That, to me, I believe, is the driving force. Second, something very important happened in church history. There was a very long time in church history where you could argue that the church had the authority, magisterial authority, especially within Catholicism. They had the authority to interpret the Bible. They told you what to believe about eschatology. They told you what to believe about end times, and you accepted their authority. But once the Protestant Reformation happened, they broke away from the church having the authority, and the authority was supposed to be to the scriptures, but it becomes now to you reading the scriptures. Well, when that happens, you're going to break away possibly from the eschatology that the church told you to believe, because now you're basing it on scripture, hopefully scripture alone. Now, you're going to still have your own cultural influences. It's going to happen. But you're going to the scriptures and you're like, wait, the scripture says this is going to happen, that Jesus is going to return in like manner. Okay, what does it believe? And Revelation is saying this. You started having people trying to figure out on their own and not just rely on a magisterial authority going, just believe this about the end times and that's enough. You don't need anything else. Jesus is going to return. We don't need to figure anything else out. Well, they're like, no, we need to figure out more. So you have two things. The Protestant Reformation took the power from the church to simply tell you what to believe about eschatology, put it now in the hands of the individuals. Individuals started studying the Bible, and someone, Darby, came to the conclusion, I don't think God is done with Israel, which then sparked a whole new way of thinking and gives rise to dispensationalism. Higher criticism comes in to really attack the Bible, and then there's another emphasis on the verbal plenary inspiration of the Bible. People get right back to studying the Bible. Then this new dispensational ideas that are out there, they all merge together. And then you have an explosion of this new teaching of, we'll call it, premillennial dispensationalism begins to spread through the church. And it becomes a dominant part of American Christian culture. Now, again, that's how it becomes a part of the culture. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Doesn't mean it's right. It just means it becomes a part of the culture. What we have to realize is that American Christian culture then took some of these ideas, and in many cases, they begin to reflect Christian. Look, a lot of things happen when culture takes it. I guess I'll end it with this because we're about out of time. Instead of continuing down that path, I'll stop right here and say this. The thing I really want you to get from this is that you have to constantly do everything in your power to block out all of what Christian culture is saying and study the Bible. Then you can take what the Bible is saying, then compare it to what Christian culture around you is saying, and then either reject what American Christian culture is saying, right? Reject it and offer a different perspective, or say, wait, no, American Christian culture is right. Culture should not be the determinant, the thing that influences you and how you study the Bible. Look, Western culture should not be the thing that influences your interpretation of the Bible. Eastern culture should not be the thing that influences your interpretation of the Bible. Individualism, collectivism, American Christian culture should not be the thing. It should be studying the text and figuring out what the text says. Now, you have to acknowledge all of these cultural influences. And you got to figure out, okay, especially when you're dealing with where the Bible was written. You got to understand the culture in which it was written and understand how that may influence some of the things they're saying. But don't just assume that the Bible is simply reflecting that cultural perspective, because we believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God and it reflects God's perspective, which transcends all cultures, Eastern, Western, American, European, Canadian, Israeli. It doesn't matter where you come from. It transcends all of that. So I just think this is an interesting conversation. I just think they're missing some of that, just kind of go like, well, this kind of came into American Christianity and it just became the cultural norm and people just accepted. Now, they made a dogmatic statement that it's wrong. They made a dogmatic assertion that it's wrong. But they also seem, at least one of them, they said, has a loose, I think they call it a loose view of inspiration, I think is how they said it. A loosey view of inspiration. Well, if you got someone there who have a loosey view of inspiration, then by all means, why would they believe in an eschatology that's so Bible-driven? No, you would not. You would just reject it. So first, you got to determine what you believe about inspiration, because what you believe about inspiration will greatly determine how you're going to interpret Scripture. Your view on inspiration really becomes foundational to your view on hermeneutics. So, all right, I'll stop right there. There's a lot. I don't know if I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, but it's another discussion about culture. Really, I don't know if it does remind me that, look, listen, they may be rejecting American Christian culture and what it had to say about eschatology from the 70s to the 90s, through the 90s. But all of those guys speaking, they still have their own cultural perspectives that I guarantee you greatly influence how they interpret the Bible. We all have them. We've just got to try to deal with them. All right. There. Hopefully it was an interesting conversation. We'll come back and we'll address this again tomorrow. We'll listen to the last 28 minutes and see where else we want to go with it. All right. I'll stop right there. I'm going to go home and get food. Email me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. All right. Everyone have a great day. Thanks for listening. God bless.